Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of the Refurbishment Mastery podcast, which is part 2 of a series I started last week to celebrate my 40th year in construction. It was September 1985, when I first took a full-time job in construction, originally as a quantity surveyor working for building contracting businesses. And in the episode I released last week, I was talking about some of the early parts of that career. So picking that up and carrying on with some other stories, and importantly, some other tips that I can help you with to help you grow your experience, your knowledge, and help you deliver projects better. So I was we'd won a project at Kingston University. It was a bit of an odd project. We were improving the lighting in the corridors. We were running new services through the corridors. I think we were doing air conditioning and things like that through the corridors. The client there had engaged an architect to design what was believed was needed for these corridors, and what the architect had designed was from a concept really visually striking. That it was a quite a smart metal kind of ceiling. There was some real nice light features in here, but what the architect hadn't really considered was how these panels were made and how these panels were were fixed properly, and importantly, how these panels, how you could maintain the lights and the air conditioning and everything that was up there. It's quite hard to explain the whole thing, and in fact, I can't remember the whole thing. But what effectively came to light was what was designed didn't really work. And we had won this project to do the work over the summer shutdown. And of course, as you know, a lot of universities are closed for long periods of time, probably in those days even longer, and there were less summer schools going on. So we had the run of this property to do a lot of quantity of these corridors. But it got to the end of the summer holidays, and because of all of these problems and the logistics, we just had not been able to finish the project at all. And in fact, we still had a lot of fundamental issues. We solved a lot of them, but there were still problems at the junctions where the corridors met. There were different problems where there were different fire issues with fire doors and different ceiling heights and things like that. And in the end, actually, the architect had got sacked, and I was working directly with the client, and we could only work over the weekends. So we would put a team in there on Friday night, starting at 5 o'clock, and they would work over as much of the weekends. And then on a Monday, I would meet with the client and look at their progress, and we'd work out what we were doing the following Friday, and we'd try and work out all of the problems. And it was a real hassly job, really. I had to be there on Friday night in Kingston. And I had to be back there on Monday morning in Kingston. So for me, it was a real hassly thing to do. And the work was just slow, and it just nothing flowed, and it was one problem after another. But when we got to the end of that when we got to the end of that project, the client said to me, he said, "Martin, you are the first person I've worked with who has not run away from problems." He said, "You didn't bat those problems back to anyone. You just worked with me to find solutions to everything." He said, "What I'd like to do is get you involved in some more projects we've got here." He said, "I know some of them are going to have some problems on, but I know you'll help me find solutions." And so for the next few years, I got repeat business from that client because I didn't run away from the problems in the first place. I could have blamed it on other people, but I tried to find solutions. And whilst we didn't make a lot of money from the initial project, we made a huge amount of money from the follow-ons because had stuck with the problems. And in fact, that was then starting to meld my next part of my career, where I started to focus on projects that were more complicated. The projects which most people didn't want, I actually made a bit of a point of trying to get involved with those because I knew that I could add my skills and my knowledge to make money, and there was less competition in that market. So don't run away from problems, front them up, navigate away through them, whatever those problems are. Running away from them actually won't do you any favors in the longer term. And if you stick with them, you may well get some of the benefits as I did at that time. I managed to get some follow up work. In fact, I got a lot of follow up work from Kingston University, and a lot of their work they had a lot of planned work, but what they would have is spare bits of budget here, there, and everywhere, and they would have to spend it quite quickly. And so a lot of the work I got involved with was fairly urgent kind of things to spend money. We had a project there to refurbish their dining room or one of their dining rooms, and it was a sizable project to upgrade this dining room. But they found right before it started that they actually had more money than they had. Yeah, than was the cost of the works that we were doing. So they decided to lift the quality of this dining room from kind of, if you can imagine, university dining room to much more function suite. And the key thing was that rather than just refurbish this dining room, put new flooring down, decorate it, and some new lighting and what have you, they wanted some funky ceiling designs, drop ceilings at different levels, the kind of things you'll see in pubs and clubs and restaurants and hotels and things like that. And they wanted to do different levels in here and different floor finishes. And because this was all had to be done in the summer holidays, it was all fairly short notice. And the problem was that we'd agreed to do all of this extra funky ceiling system, but suddenly we hadn't got a contractor to do it. And I'd spoken to all of my regular contractors, and they'd all said, look, we're just too busy. This is the summer holidays. There's always a shortage of resources in the summer holidays. There's always a lot more work in summer holidays. We just can't do it. And so I had to phone around, and I tried all of my usual resources, and was on to, this is before the days of Google, but I was into the yellow pages. And I met this fella who said to me, yeah, I've got a team of people that can do this project for you. He said, I'm going to need a little bit of help. I haven't got lots of money to buy all of the materials, so you might have to buy the materials for me. And it was like, well, we'll have to do whatever we need to do to get this project done. Anyway, this fella turns up with his team of guys. We've bought some materials to get him started. He's given me a shopping list for the next lot of materials. We've bought that. We've agreed some payments with him, and he's getting on and doing the work. He's not the best, but he is getting it done. It's all up in the ceiling, so it's not the quality. It doesn't have to be perfect, and he's getting things done. The materials is a bit uncertain. There seems to be a lot of material sitting around, but we're buying what he needs. We get to the end of the project, and he puts in a really big final account, claiming that there was lots of extra work and claiming that we held him up and disrupted him, which we hadn't at all. He was just disorganized. I, in return, went back to him and said, well, hold on. We've also spent this amount on materials, and that needs to come off your final figure. And he said, no, that's not right. You've spent far more than you should have done. You didn't buy the right materials from the right suppliers. And I'm saying, we bought them from your preferred suppliers. We bought what you needed. And so this went backwards and forwards a few times. And in those days, of course, it was telephone and probably fax machine. And in the end, I said to him, look, we need to have a face-to-face meeting and try and sort this out. He says, yeah, I'll come to your office and we will sort it all out. So this fella turns up in the office. He was wearing a yellow jumpsuit. In fact, my secretary came through to me. She said, "There's a fella dressed as a banana turned up in the reception." So yeah, so he turns up in his yellow jumpsuit, and we go into the meeting room, and he just lets rip on me. Everything is at absolutely top volume, and I've literally sat there and answered everything calmly. I didn't raise my voice at all. I just answered every issue he had, batted everything back to him, and he was getting more and more irate. He was perspiring, he was banging the table, he was spitting, he was swearing, he was just losing his way. One of the other people in the office actually stuck their head in to see if I was okay. And I've said, yeah, we're okay. I'm just waiting. I'm not going to say this guy's name. I'm just waiting for him to calm down and realize that he needs to listen to me. So if you are ever in a heated discussion, always keep your calm. I have always tried not to raise my voice in any kind of negotiations. And I certainly on that occasion kept control of the whole situation. If I had got as irate as him, we would definitely have ended up punching each other. But I didn't get irate. I kept it calm. Now, one of the things I said, so that was my first tip relating to this fella, keep your calm in all negotiations. One of the things I said to him is, look, this is our situation. What I recommend you do is you go and get advice from a legal person. Take this, what I'm saying, to a solicitor and get them to look after you. Because if I've got it wrong, that solicitor will write back to me, or the solicitor will tell you how to reply to me. But if I've got it right, it now becomes a second set of eyes. And it was about 4 weeks later, I get a fax saying, I will agree an amount of money. And that was exactly the amount of money I told him was realistic for this payment to be. Now, I don't know the full story, but what I've learned from that since, and I've used this numerous times since, is if you are in a dispute with someone and you believe you're correct, recommend that they take some legal advice. Because if they take legal advice and you are correct, then you'll be found to be correct. They may well think, well, if this person is so keen that I take legal advice, they're obviously happy that they're telling me the right thing. So I'm going to have to back down. I don't know which way it went in this case, but if you do get yourself in a legal position and you believe you are right, recommend the other person takes legal advice. In a case of working with builders, most builders won't take legal advice. They will take advice from someone down the pub, but that isn't necessarily proper legal advice. So if you believe you're right, don't be afraid to say to the other person, take some legal advice. By this time in my career, I was starting to realize that a lot of it was psychology. And that I'd been successful from dealing with problems and looking after clients. I was starting to win work that were more complicated, so there was less competition. I was starting to work out how to negotiate with people and win disputes. And I started to realize that what became really important on any project was trying to work out the metrics for success. I spoke on the last webinar, sorry, not on the last webinar, on the last podcast, that I was working at Croydon Council. When I was working there for the building contractor that was doing their maintenance works, I worked out how their KPIs triggered, and I worked out how to be really successful in their eyes based on success on their KPIs. There were some projects that didn't fall under their KPI metrics. There were some that did. And I worked out that if we did all of the ones that fell under KPIs really, really well, our KPIs were so high that they never considered some of the other projects. And that we would take resources from some projects and put them onto the things that were measured by KPIs. I'd started to realize that you had to understand what was important for any client as far as their metric. And this applies to everything we're doing now as property investors. What is important for your tenant, for your guest, for your purchaser? That's what you need to deliver, not something else that might be on the periphery. And what really brought this to a head was I can't really remember the circumstances behind this conversation, but it was a conversation I was having with a painter one day. And the painter was just a throwaway comments. Painter's throwaway comment was, well, of course, in any office building, the most important job for me is to paint the back of the managing director's toilet door to a really high standard. And if you think about that story, what he's saying is the managing director has got a bit of time to look at the quality of his toilet door. If you paint that to a good standard, the perception is that everything else is to a good standard. Understand what's important in whatever you're doing and get those bits right, whatever that is. And there'll be a perception that everything else is right beyond that. But you'll also delight your clients, whoever they may be. One of the really one of the really more complex projects or clients I started working with at this time was the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. So I'm now working on projects in listed buildings where we've got the public to deal with, we've got noise restrictions, we've got priceless artifacts, we've got security issues, we've got delivery problems. And those were the kinds of projects that I started to get involved with. If you ever go to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, go up the front steps and you'll come into a foyer area, which looks a little bit like a hotel lobby area to some extent. You can buy your brochure and your postcards and all the usual bits and pieces that museums will sell you. If you do a sharp right and a sharp right again and go down some steps, you'll end up down in some toilets. Now, one of my projects there was to refurbish these toilets. Now, of course, being the Victoria and Albert Museum, this wasn't £3,000 worth of toilet. This was tens of thousands of pounds of toilets. They were big toilets, lots of space, of course, needed for the volume of people going through the museums. These were public toilets, and of course they needed to be statement, so they were done in very high quality materials, and at the time quite funky designed, run of the mill now, but at the time they were quite funky designs. And I started working on that project, and what I realised was that it didn't matter how good the tradesmen were that were doing the project, the guys that were doing the plumbing, doing the lighting, doing all of the tiling, and there was a lot of tiling. In fact, it was high. It might even have been stone rather than tiling. So yeah, it didn't matter how good those guys were. If I couldn't manage the project well and sort out the security issues, which meant that I had to have all of my deliveries at a set time. And when I made a delivery or when I arranged a delivery, they had to have the driver's number, the driver's name, the registration number of the truck that was turning up, and that I could only have deliveries distributed to my site before 10 o'clock in the morning when the museum started. So we were having deliveries somewhere, around about 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, so that we could get things loaded out. If I got those deliveries wrong and the van got turned away, my guys on site, no matter how good they were, couldn't actually deliver a day's work, and we would lose money as a result. And this is really important now as property investors for you to understand. It doesn't matter how good your builders are, if you can't manage the project, if you haven't got the project properly designed, if you haven't got all the information from the architect before the builder starts, it will cost you money somewhere along the way. And I, as I said, I did a lot of work that went on to some very complicated projects and really focused on how do I deliver these complicated projects so that my guys can actually do the build that actually they're perfectly capable of doing, they're really good at doing, but they still rely on me to ensure that I have managed my part to ensure that they can succeed. So do make sure that you manage the project from a higher level so that your builders can succeed with the works that they're doing. Another project I picked up was in the tower at Canary Wharf. If any of you know South London or East London, you've perhaps seen the tower at Canary Wharf. At the time, it was the tallest building in the country. It's got a kind of little pyramid on the top of it, 50 floors of offices, and then this little pyramid on the top of it. My company, we won a project. Actually, it was easy to remember because we were on the 42nd floor, so level 42. Those of you of the right age will understand the significance of working on level 42. We were refurbishing the whole floor. There was a company in there. There was a bank in there actually, and we were reconfiguring their thing, rebranding everything they would do, building them new reception counters, and upgrading air conditioning, lighting, all the kinds of things you do in office buildings. And I went in there one day. So I'd go there, once a week to catch up with the guys and see how things were going. I went in there one day. I got there about 11 o'clock. Got in the lift, went up, and everyone on site is in a really foul mood. And it's like there's this real atmosphere on site, and it's like, oh my word, what has happened? Is it me? Have they got the ump with me? Has something gone wrong with payments? What has happened? And I started realizing that I was I couldn't have a conversation with anyone. And you couldn't talk about the weather, you couldn't talk about the football last night or anything. No one wanted to talk. Spoke to my manager and said, "Look, what has happened here? There is something clearly badly wrong here." And he said, "Yeah, everyone's got the hump." He said they've only started work 10 minutes ago, and it's 11:30 now. I said, "Well, what's happened?" They said, "Oh, well, everyone got into work this morning. They were all about to start working at 8 o'clock. The fire alarm goes off in the building, so everyone has to evacuate. They've walked 42 stories down the fire exit and had to congregate out on the street with all the other thousands of people that are in this building. And then when they've established that it was a false alarm and they can let everyone back in, they let all of the people working in the offices back in the lifts first, and then they've let all the builders come in last. So the builders have had to stand out on the street, having walked 42 floors of fire escape out. They've had to wait around on the street, and then they've lost effectively a third of their day's work. And that was why they had the ump, because they hadn't got the opportunity to earn money. They didn't do any work in that third of a day, so they didn't earn any money. And those that worked directly for us, we obviously had to pay, but the subcontractors just didn't earn any money. So be tolerant when people are having a bad day. I can't remember how we got around it in the end. I've got a feeling I went away and got cake for everyone or donuts or something like that. I think that's what I did. And I certainly got the kettle on and made quite a lot of tea for people that were working there, because it was just one of those things. So when people are having a bad day, be tolerant of them. Sometimes it's worth leaving them just on their own until the next day, go back the next day if necessary, but look after them, go and buy some cakes. Hot day, buy them some ice cream. That kind of thing there's nothing bad in that. That will help you out. My boss called me in one day and he said to me, "Martin, I need you to run this really important project. It's a big house. It's just round the corner from Harrods. And he says to me, someone I used to work for has bought the house and they want it refurbished. And we need to do a really, really good job on it." Now, actually, the person who owned this house wasn't someone I knew, but I knew who he was. He was in the public domain. And if I gave you his name, you wouldn't know who he was. But if I told you what company he was in those days, he was the chairman of, the company had his name in it. His surname was the company's or part of the company's name. So he was well known. And he had this project just around the corner from Harrods, high quality building. He wanted to refurbish it not for him and his family to live in so much, but for it to be his London base. He had another home out in the country somewhere, and he wanted the basement of this building. He wanted to convert into kind of conference facilities so that he could hold board meetings there. And this was in the early days of real IT. So he was in the early days of wanting wanting what we would now use as Zoom, but we were putting in big screens and things like that. And he discovered this thing called He had an enormous music collection, and he'd got this big hard drive, and he'd loaded all of his CDs onto this hard drive, and we were putting cables around the building so that there were speakers in every room. And this is very, very early days of of sound systems in properties. He hadn't got the property fully designed, so there's a learning there. So he said to us, what I want to do is I want you to do the whole lot on invoice. I'll pay you on invoice, and I'll pay you 12.5% on top of all of your invoices to for your management. And off we went. And it was a big project. It was £1 million plus worth of work. One of the bigger projects I've done at that stage, generally bigger than I would normally have done. But because it was prestigious, my governor had asked me to look after it, as I was reasonably senior at that point. And so we were doing this work, and what I'd started to realise was that money wasn't the key driver for him. Quality was the key driver for him. So as long as I got the quality right, he wasn't really double checking on anything at all. And we'd got this big high level budget figure, and it didn't look as though we were going to exceed the budget. Let's jumping in to make sure that you have everything you need. Now, in a number of these podcasts, you would have heard me talk about my community, and I want to ensure that you know how you can join that community. Obviously, within these podcasts, there's a limit to the detail I can go into the recording, and of course, a lot of things are very generic. So what if you had access to join me on a Zoom call for 90 minutes every single week in a group coaching environment? You could get your questions answered whenever they come up and learn from other members' questions. Plus, you also get 10 hours of training videos, an HMO refurbishment case study, some sample documents and checklists that will help you run your projects far more effectively. Membership of my community is just £89 a month. You get the first month free, and you can also cancel anytime after that. Plus, as a listener of this podcast, there's a promo code to help you save £20 every single month that you remain a member. So just make a note of VIP discount 20, VIP discount 20, all in capital letters, and put that into the checkout. You'll find the checkout on my website, www.refurbishmentmastery.com. Scroll down the page, you'll find the link for the Project Management Accelerator. Use the promo code VIP discount 20, and you'll be signed up at just £69 a month. I look forward to seeing you in that community very, very soon. Now back to the podcast. So I started to look for ways of making money. And the way I would make money was I would so a part of the work, the plasterer would come to me with his account for doing his work, and it would come to £50,000 worth of plastering work, and I would show that to my client, and my client would pay £50,000, and I would go to the builder and I'd say, so what can you do on your £50,000? Is there a bit of a deal to be done here? What if I paid you a little bit quicker? Would you give me a discount? And I'm not sure about that item. I think that's probably double counted. I'm not sure that's right. And I'd negotiate. And I'd negotiate with the plasterer, and the plasterer would come back and say, well, I'll tell you what, if you pay me this week, I'll settle for £48,000. And we'd always make sure we had the money in the bank. So we'd pay quickly. Plasterer was delighted. He hasn't got an account sitting around. He's got money in his bank. And my client was delighted because we'd got the plastering done to a really good standard. And in the middle was £2,000. And all of these £2,000 and little bits here, there and everywhere, and me negotiating it everywhere, actually meant that by the end of the project, my governor called me in and he said, Martin, he said, I need to understand, we won this project at cost plus 12.5%. How come you've made 17% profit on this? Where did the other 5% or the other 4.5% or whatever it is come from? And I said, I just did a few little deals here, there, and everywhere. And my boss was like, how do you do that? And I said, well, it's all relationships. You work with people, you do deals. And the client was delighted. The client didn't have a problem at all. In fact, I'd managed to manipulate some figures for him so that he didn't pay as much VAT. So he was over the moon. Again, coming back to working out what delights who. My boss was happy, although he couldn't work out how I'd made money because I never really disclosed to him. But the learning I want to pass on to you here is you really need to be avoiding doing any joint ventures with a builder, because that client who should have known better, because by the way his company was a building company, and he didn't want to use his own people, he didn't want to use anyone that was likely to know his business. So he should have known better. He joint ventured with a builder, which was us, and we made money from what he wanted doing to his properties. So my advice to you is never joint venture with a builder, because the smart ones, you will not even see them making money from you, because the smart ones know how to do it. I know how to do it. If you're joint venturing with a builder now, get in touch with me and I will try and look after your side. I worked with a solicitor a number of years ago. He joint ventured with a builder. Sadly, the builder had gone into liquidation. The solicitor said, well, it's not a problem. There's not a lot of work left. We went to site and looked at it, and the solicitor said, oh my word, there's thousands of pounds worth of work left on this project. He said, based on what I'd paid the builder, I thought there wasn't much work left on it. And now I've got down here and looked at it. I found the builder's ripped me off. Unfortunately, the builder had gone into liquidation, so he was out of pocket. Working on that project in London, just around the corner from Harrods, a fellow walked past one day. I was outside, and a fellow walked past, and he said, "Are you in charge of this project?" I said, "Yeah, it's nearly finished. What's your interest in it?" He said, "Well, I've got a project just round the corner." He said, "Can you show me what you're doing here?" So took him in, showed it. We were pretty close to finishing at the time. Introduced him to my manager, and yeah, it was a good standard project, of course. And this guy around the corner said, "Well, yeah, I'd like to talk to you about running my project." And I said, "Well, this one I'm doing on cost plus because it's quite complicated." He said, "I think that would be right for me as well." So what a result. I've just made good money from the first cost plus. I've got another one that's cost plus round the corner. I negotiated that one at cost plus 15%. So 15% covered my overheads and profit. And so we started on that project. And it was pretty well designed, to be honest, but it was a very prestigious client again. Actually, it was a property owned by a foreign embassy, a foreign country that would be known to have lots of money. And they wanted it refurbished to be a London property that, when some of their diplomats and important people from their country came over, they had somewhere to stay. Effectively, like very, very high end serviced accommodation, top of the range serviced accommodation. And by that I mean there were gold plated taps and things like that in this property. It really was very, very high end. What came to light was partway through the project, they engaged an interior designer. So we'd been building to the architect's details. This interior designer came in and said, hold on, this is nowhere near good enough quality. We need to review the specification. At which point, the interior designer pretty much condemned everything we'd done already. It wasn't our fault. We'd followed the architect's drawings. They sacked the architect. Interior designer completely redesigned the interior of this property to a different style and everything. And we ended up ripping out lots of what we'd already done. Bearing in mind, we'd done things to a good standard already. And I'm talking here about paneling and joinery work and stone work and things like that. This was a very high-end property. And we ripped the whole lot out. And the learning there was no one had really designed this project from end to end. They designed it as they went, even worse than the previous one. And as a result, spent way over the top. So my advice to you is do not start a project until you've designed it through, until you know what the end user needs. And only that point should you be engaging with builders and actually starting a project. If you try and design as you go, that's where you'll end up spending far too much money and undoing everything at the end of the day. I ended up doing more work with that client later on in other buildings to a really, really good high standard. So yeah, again, a really good client there. I got involved with a project out in Ealing at a hospital. It was a mental health hospital, actually, and actually a very, very famous mental health hospital in its day, insofar as it's where the very early mental health care was carried out in London. Well, this place was out in Ealing. There was another significant place in the Beckenham area. Those two places between them were very, very significant in the early days of mental health care in London. And this old property needed to have some work done to it. In fact, um, the first project I got involved with was repair work to a listed wall. Now, this wall was about a mile long, so I mean it's an enormous hospital site, maybe a bit less than a mile, but certainly a long wall. On one side of it was of it was the hospital. On the other side was the Grand Union Canal, and we're repairing this wall that is a listed structure because it is unsafe and runs the risk of falling onto the towpath. And there was gates and doorways through it. We had to rebuild all of those. We found all sorts of problems with Japanese knotweed. We had to deal with all of that. So a significant project, I don't know, 250, 300,000 pounds worth of work. Off we go. Off the back of that, I won another project in the same hospital site at their chapel. So they had this really nice chapel building that was a listed building, but it was dilapidating. There was water coming in the roof. The roof was leaking, and there was some structural problems with it where the timbers had rotted. So it was deemed unsafe. So we won this project to do the work to repair this listed chapel building. And we're in the chapel. We've got scaffolding up on the outside, on the inside. We're getting up into this roof space. And what we found up in the roof space was a massive can of worms. Just about every bit of timber up in the roof space was rotting, but just about every single bit of timber up in the roof space had been done to a really bespoke style, with exposed joinery type jointing, which, because the building was grade 1 listed, had to be replicated in exactly the same standard that it had been built in back in the day, 200 and whatever years ago. So the cost of our works on that, bear in mind we've already done 250, 300 grand's worth of work in the other place. This project there, I think, was another £300,000. But because of all this extra work that we found that had to be done because it had been started, the final account of that project was somewhere in the region of £500,000. And the learning here, guys, is listed buildings can be a massive, massive liability. Be very, very careful if you're buying listed buildings. The end of this part of this story was that actually what had happened was this hospital trust that owned these hospital buildings had made a planning application to build some new ward space to modern standards, because they still had wards in some of these buildings that were 200 and something years old. So they put in a planning application to build some new modern wards, and the planning had been accepted with a provision that they could only start the work when they had upgraded and improved all of their listed building structures on their site. So they couldn't look after the patients that needed care because they hadn't built the wards. They couldn't build the wards because they hadn't been maintaining their listed structures. And in maintaining their listed structures, they ran out of money to build the wards because there was a whole can of worms. So be very, very careful of listed buildings, because you are not in charge of the budget. If the conservation officer insists on some work being done, then you are obliged to do it. Whether you've got the money or not, you've got to do it. So be very, very careful. And now on to point number 10, the last tip in this episode. Goes to one of the last projects I was running when I was employed. A project in Kensington, again, good standard, good high-end project. It was actually an office building, a high-end office building, Yeah, so a real, significant one. And some of you might know office buildings. They end up quite often with toilets on the staircase. So this was shared offices. So people were coming out of shared offices, and then there'd be gents on one level, and then ladies on the next, and then gents on the next, ladies on the next. And this was something like a 10-story building. So we had to refurbish. We were refurbishing the toilets and all the staircases and the reception area and other bits and pieces. It had parking and other things. So it was a big project. But we couldn't obviously do all of the toilets at the same time. We could only do 2 toilets at a time. Maybe we staggered it a bit more than that. But we had, I think, what was a 5-phase project, maybe more than that. And we ended up falling out with the tiler in the first phase, and had a dispute with him, had to threaten legal action, at which point he sorted himself out. We had ongoing problems that ultimately led to a massive dispute with the tiler. Bearing in mind, all of the stairs were tiled as well. All of the toilets are tiled. All of the receptions tiled. There's lots of tiling on this, so this is a significant part of the project, and the tiler is not delivering. And we've had to keep threatening legal actions. And we got to a point, my managing director said to me, Martin, we need to really escalate this. You need to terminate the contract. And I said, I'm not sure I can. We need to take some advice. We didn't. He just wanted it to terminate. And what ended up happening was we ended up in this massive dispute. And there was me trying to sort it from my side, and there was the other company's project manager trying to sort it from this side. And him and I had just fallen out with each other. It had driven me mad. It had gone on for months, and I was just fed up with this fella. And I said to my managing director, look, what you need to do is you need to meet his managing director and just agree that him and me are useless. We can't sort it all out. And you two need to sort it all out and just come to an agreement and settle financially. I said, they're partially in the wrong. We might be in the wrong. We've issued notices that we probably haven't done right. The learning here, guys, is my managing director would not talk to his managing director. He said to me, it's your job. You sort it all out. Next thing we know is we've got a threat of legal action against us. We didn't go to court. It went to adjudication, which is where someone sits in the middle. And we were, as I had thought, found to be in the wrong. Not 100% in the wrong, but we had definitely not followed the contract as properly as we should have done. And we had acted prematurely, giving him notice and terminating his contract. And I said to my managing director, I thought this had happened. And we lost that case. This was a project. I don't think we lost money on the project overall. We ended up paying something like £40,000 out to settle it, but the project was big enough it could sustain it. But that was £40,000 of profit we didn't get. And the learning here really is we could have settled that dispute way quicker. Had I been given the authority by my managing director, I think 10, £15,000 would probably have solved that problem rather than the £40,000 that we ended up having to pay because we lost it. So if you've got a dispute, settle it quickly. If you need to put some money behind it, put some money behind it. We could have settled that for £15,000. My managing director could have spoken to his managing director, probably settled it for the same kind of money. In the end, it cost us £40,000 or more to sort it out. So if you ever get in a dispute, taking account of some of the things I was saying earlier on in this episode and also in the previous episode about negotiations and talking to people, settle it quickly. If necessary, throw some money at it to make it go away. A little bonus tip on this episode, something that same managing director used to say to me all of the time is, you cannot afford to be carrying rocks in your rucksack. He used to say, what is the biggest rock in your rucksack? And although he used to say that to me, he didn't actually follow his own guidance here. But when you've got problems, get rid of them quickly. That is your biggest rock. Do a deal, get rid of it. It might make you cringe. You might not be happy, but if it gets rid of it, you can focus your headspace onto bigger deals, better deals, the next deal, and you haven't got this burden hanging around behind you. And the learning from that project is we should have settled that dispute way, way earlier than we did, and then it wouldn't have gone legal, and we wouldn't have had to pay £40,000 out. We could probably have got away with £10,000 to £15,000, and the whole thing would have gone away. I wouldn't have had to spend 2 weeks preparing all of our paperwork and all the other stuff that went into all of that. So settle your disputes quickly, guys. There we go. That's the next 10 done. So that's 20 tips. I'll be back with you on the next 2 episodes of the podcast to do the next 20. The next 10 of those will be next Thursday as the next podcast episode is released. So have a really good week and catch up with you then, guys.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share, and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.